Hola a todos,
Hello,
bienvenidos
everybody.
a la quinta edición de la
Welcome to the
BIM.
fifth edition of
Estamos
BIM.
en una nueva mesa redonda con
This is
artistas
a roundtable with
del
artists
proyecto
of
Mirarnos a
the
los ojos
project
volverá.
Gazing into Each Other's
Un
Eyes
proyecto que en
that
esta
will come
edición
back. This
virtual,
project,
por primera
in
vez,
this virtual edition for the first time,
ahí veo unas imágenes en vivo y en directo
I
de
can see some
Andrés.
images, some live images of the street from Andres.
Con esta
They
presentación.
distracted
Es
me,
interesante cómo aparecen las
but it is
imágenes
interesting to see how images turn up
de un evento
live in
que
an
tiene que ver con
event
poner el cuerpo en la calle, un poco lo que
that
hablábamos
has to do with putting the body on the streets,
en fin, bueno, mirarnos a los ojos, volverá.
gazing into each other's eyes. We will come back at this fifth edition of the Beam, where we invite artists from different areas in the world, some who have already participated in other years, showing their works from 2012 onwards. And in that sense, you could think that gazing into each other's eyes is a sort of retrospective, a way to meet all of those people who collaborated with BIM and who participated of the different edition, which are now all together on this platform in this virtual space, which allows us to meet each other and to reflect and see how the different contributions from the audiovisual production in these times of confinement and lockup and pandemic, of a solitude and a loneliness which is inhabited by archive and memories, gazing through the window. And today we have Mariano Lombardo, Gustavo Fontan, Gianfranco Foscino, Martin Vilela, and Paz Encina. We send a special regards to Cristian Regalado, who was invited to this session, but unfortunately has no Wi-Fi connection where he lives, and he sent his regards. This is called the Images of Intimacy, this roundtable, and what we wanted to propose to start talking is the set of works that each of you contributed to the project, where we managed to see the dimension of what's intimate, which is put forward with regards to its power, to its strength, and also to think about the other person, dialogue, to dissolve oneself in conversation through a shared perspective or gaze. If anybody wants to begin, otherwise, Marian, you are the first one I mentioned. Would you like to say something with regards to your work? And also with regards to others' works, and we invite everybody to have a look at it.
Bueno, gracias Ari.
Okay, thank you, Ari.
Bueno, muchas gracias a
Thank you
a Gaby, Andrés, Ari,
to
a
Bim,
todo el
Gabi,
equipo
Andres, Ari, and
por
the
la
whole team
invitación.
for inviting me.
La verdad que súper contenta de
I am so
participar en esta
happy
mesa
to participate
con
in this
artistas y
roundtable
con personas que admiro un montón,
with
así que
artists
re
and people I
contenta.
really admire.
Y bueno, estos días estuve también revisitando
I was also
un poco
revisiting
los trabajos
the works
de quienes integran la mesa para
of
pensar
the
algunas
people involved
ideas, algunas
to get some ideas,
disparadores o
to
preguntas, más que nada
brainstorm,
pensando esto que es una mesa redonda y que
and to
interesaría
pick up
mucho por
on
ahí,
some of the ideas that we could
más
bring
allá
up in
de
this roundtable
responder o hablar de mi
discussion.
trabajo, también poder
Besides from speaking about
pensar
my
con quienes
work,
integran la mesa.
I wanted to be able to
Así que bueno, si
bring
quieren, bueno, puedo
ideas.
leer un pequeño mini textito
I can read a
que
small
escribí a
text
modo
that I
de
wrote
un poco de reflexión o
as a
recogiendo
reflection
algunas ideas. a partir de
putting
los
some
trabajos
ideas
que
forth
que
from
vi
the
y
works
compartimos
that I
acá,
saw in these last few days.
Bueno, de las sinopsis o
The
relatos que
synopsis
cada quien construyó para
and the
contar su
narrations
obra,
that
¿no?
each person created.
Así que bueno, leo esto y luego
Okay, I'm going to
también,
read
por
this, and
supuesto,
then, of
quedo
course,
ahí abierta para seguir
I'm open
pensando.
to discussion and thought.
Bien. Desde marzo estamos sobre
From
todo
March,
adentro,
we have been
habitando más que
spending time
nunca junto a
inside,
los diversos objetos
inhabiting
más o menos
with our
queridos,
objects
elegidos o
which
heredados,
are
con los
chosen,
que
inherited,
compartimos el
or loved,
espacio,
that
muy
we share
cerca de
the
las
space with,
personas,
very close
mascotas,
to the
plantas, para que
people, the
convivimos y
pets,
o nosotros
and the
mismos,
plants that we
nosotros
live
mismos.
with, or ourselves,
Mirando hacia afuera a través de
looking out
rectángulos, ventanas
through
y
rectangles,
pantallas.
windows,
Mirando
and
hacia adentro,
screens,
en mi
looking
caso, cada
within,
vez
in
más,
my
un
case,
escenario vacío.
more and more into
Las
an
imágenes de la
empty
intimidad
stage
pareciera que abundan y
scenario.
circulan más que nunca.
Images
Todas las cámaras nos miran, nos
circulate. All
espejan.
cameras are looking
Cámaras
at
en
us
teléfonos y
and awaiting
computadoras,
us
cámaras que
in our
elegimos
cell
prender
phones,
o
in
apagar
our
en cada
screens that
videollamada.
we choose to turn on or
Mientras
off with
conversamos
every
con otros,
video call.
otras,
As
otros,
we talk
nos
with
vemos
others,
simultáneamente
we
hablar y escuchar.
simultaneously
Lejos
see
parece
each
estar
other,
ese gesto
speak,
iniciático
and
de la video
listen.
performance, de dar
There
vuelta a la
is
cámara, cambiar la
no
dirección,
video
verse y hacer una
performance of
acción para la
turning the
cámara.
camera and doing
Ahora
a
todas las
zoom for the
cámaras nos
camera. All
miran y ellas
cameras
son
are
nuestras principales
staring at us,
interlocutoras.
and they are our main
Muchas de nuestras acciones emitidas son
other.
en principios
Many
acciones
of
para
our
la cámara.
actions are actions
Y
for the
junto con
camera.
nosotros y
And
nosotras
together with
viajan
us,
fragmentos de nuestra
there are
cotidianidad, de
fragments
nuestros
of our
espacios
daily
íntimos
lives
retratados al
traveling these
azar o
intimate
intencionalmente.
spaces, which are shown
Un poco a partir
by
de esto es que me
coincidence or
preguntaba,
intentionally. And I
pensando
was wondering,
en
thinking
el
about
título o el nombre de esta mesa,
the
cuáles
name of
son
this session,
entonces de esas
what
imágenes de la
are then
intimidad,
the
cuando
images
tantas
of
imágenes
intimacy
de la
when
intimidad
so
están
many
ahora
images of
públicas,
intimacy are
expuestas,
now made public
y cuáles
and
son en
exposed? And what
realidad esas imágenes
are
de intimidad que elegimos
the
mostrar, cuáles son
intimacy
las
images
que
that we choose
dentro
to
de toda
show?
esta
What are the
situación, cuáles son
ones
las que
that
elegimos
within this
mostrar.
situation we choose to
Y aquí
show?
hice como un pequeño,
And
un
then
pequeño
I did a
recorrido
small
por los
summary
trabajos de quienes
through the
integran la
works of
mesa o algo
people who
así.
are in this
¿Qué mirar en este
session.
contexto?
What to
No hay
look for
relato, nos
in
dice
this
Gustavo.
context? There is no
Si no hay
narration, Gustavo
relato,
says. If
quedan
there
solo
is
las
no narration,
imágenes, esas
only
imágenes,
the images
escribirlas,
remain
y tiempo.
and
Tener
time.
tiempo. Se
To
necesita
have time.
tiempo
We need
para hacer un
time
duelo.
to
Tener
be able to
tiempo para
grieve,
transitar el tiempo.
to be
Dice
able to
Paz
go
a
through
Martín.
time. That's what Paz says to Martín.
Quizás sea el duelo el personaje
Perhaps
principal de esa película en
grief
suspenso de
is
Nicolás
the
y Christian,
main
pienso. ¿Será que
protagonist
vemos
of
en
the
los
movie of
animales
Nicolas
ese
and
instinto
Christian.
ante el
Perhaps we
peligro
see
que
in
hemos
animals
perdido?
the instinct
¿O será quizás
to
que nos
what we have
presagian un
lost, or
destino donde la
perhaps
fragilidad ya no es la
they show
excepción,
us a
sino
fate
condición?
where the fragility is the rule
Mientras
rather than
nuestras
the
certezas se
exception.
desploman y lo
Our
cotidiano se vuelve un espacio
certainties
extraño
fall
que nos devuelve
away
apenas
and
algún
the
que otro
daily
reflejo
becomes
conocido de ese mundo
unknown
sobreviviente en nuestros archivos,
in our
Gianfranco nos
archives.
invita a girar la
And Franco
pantalla y
invite
mirar la
us to
montaña.
turn the screen and to look
Sostener la
at the
mirada en lo que
mountain, to
permanece,
keep
aunque todo
gazing on what
cambia todo el
remains,
tiempo.
although everything changes all the time.
Bueno, hasta ahí es más o menos lo que,
That's what I
lo que
thought
un
about,
poco fui intentando hilar a partir de
trying
las
to
imágenes,
get
a partir
ideas
un poco
together
de los textos que acompañan las
from the
imágenes
texts and the images,
y bueno, y pensar cuáles son, más que
and to
nada me quedó
think,
esa pregunta para compartir, cuáles
I have
son
this
estas
question:
imágenes de intimidad que
what
elegimos
are the images
mostrar
of intimacy that we choose
y
to
por qué, ¿no?
share
¿Qué
and
potencia
show?
tienen estas imágenes de intimidad que
What is the
elegimos
power
mostrar?
of these images
¿Por
that we
qué
choose to
decidimos
show?
mostrarlas?
Why do we decide to show
Un
them?
poco eso fue mi
That
pregunta a
was
partir de lo
my
que
question,
vi
what came
y
up
leí.
through what I saw in the works presented.
Muchas gracias, Marian.
Thank you, Marian.
Gustavo, ¿querés continuar
Gustavo, would you like to continue
con el diálogo?
with this dialogue? Good afternoon. Thanks for the invite. BEAM is a true celebration, and this, in particular, in this such a strange context, allows us in this strange way to be together. So the celebration is also something that it goes through this virtual affectivity that becomes real. I'm going to tell you a few things that happened to me. They're very brief. Something that happened at this time was something that I read in this little small magazine called The Ships, something that says, that Ignacio Agüero says when he speaks about his film. He says something before the pandemic, of course. He says, if I was the Chile's interior minister, I would give a sabbatic year to half the population so that everybody can film a movie called The Other Day on in their own homes. And next year, as the first group edits the movies when they come back from work, the rest of the population has a sabbatical year and films the same film. I think it'd be great for everybody to film their house and to look at their house for a whole year paid for by the state. I think that would turn us into better people, people who know where they stand, and that would be very political. That's why the ministries will never do this. It would be too subversive for somebody to look where they're standing without the pressure to go and consume all day. Ignacio Agüero, somebody I admire and I love. And this resonated in many, many ways in the context where he said it. It's not our it's now our context. We were forced or were forced to remain in the house, to be in our homes, to look at our homes, to look the boundaries of our homes. And therefore, there is complete surprise to the context that we're undergoing. It is not the same to look the green of a plant on a normal day or to look at the green in a plant when somebody is dying underneath our window. So there is something about the interference of the pain that time provokes, the pain in many senses, that time happens from the work, the pain of death and disease, the anguish, the grief that inevitably we're all going through. And my perspective turned and turned all the time without being able to stop in a crazy way. So what I did, what I tried to do to stop twirling is to give myself some tasks as spiritual exercises. And one of the exercises was to read poetry, and the other one was to ask myself questions. From those poetries, I want to read a very brief one that has to do with the issue that this is always selective, the way we look at things. This is a poem by Jose Watanabe. It's called My Eye Has Its Reasons. I think that my eye has an arbitrary criteria for selection. Obviously, there are things that weigh more than others. It is impossible that it was just her and I in the breaking of hours, only repetitions like everybody. So I can suppose that if I was a fog, I could tell her, these might be only mirages. And I mentioned Harumi's old haiku. In the fog, I touch the boat and then I go on board. I took photographs and I told her, pose with your breasts towards the wind. If seagulls came by and she admired them, I told her that they were meat-eating birds and that the only thing that is honest about them is their song. My eyes saw everything. We went into a boat and she picked up her skirt and she put her feet in the water. She sat on the rock. It was particularly strange, the contrast of her white legs against the rock. Her leg seemed a live thing, and the rock was too corporeal and definitive for it. I would have liked to inscribe my poem in the whole landscape, but my eye arbitrarily has excluded it. and it only returns with obsessive precision the problem of texture, the thigh against the rock. Jose Watanabe, he's a Peruvian poet. And among the questions that I asked myself in all this time, some of them is, what do we look at? We look to what's latent. We look at a drama. We look at what happens. What is it that we look at? And how do we talk about what we look at? Because according to what we look at, we decide other things. And I didn't reach any conclusion. And I am happy that I haven't gotten to any conclusion. The only certainty that I had is that what is difficult to see is what's there.
Muchas gracias, Gustavo.
Thank you, Gustavo. Paz?
Bueno, eh, voy a contar
I'm going to
cómo yo llego a estas imágenes.
tell
En realidad,
everyone how
a
I
mí no me toca en mi
got
casa.
to these images. I am not home.
Y yo sí tenía como esta costumbre de
And I had
mirar
this
mi
habit
casa.
of looking at my
Estoy en esta
home.
casa hace
And I am in this
18
home
años que estoy en esta casa,
for a few years,
17, 18, 19, sí.
maybe 19
Y
years I've been in this house.
hace 4 años que estoy muy enamorada de esta casa, que me toca
In the
visitar
last 4
mucho,
years,
me
I'm
acuerdo.
so
Entonces,
in love with this home.
siempre miraba como la luz,
And I'm always looking at the
estudié la
light.
luz en Paraguay también.
I've been
Entonces,
studying about the light in Paraguay. And I've been doing that exercise already for the past few years. But in December, I split from my partner in October after 15 years of being with Ignacio. It was hard for me. And between December and January, I had a brain cancer problem. I had to travel to Buenos Aires, had a catheterization. All I wanted to do was to edit the film. I was so anguished. The film that I did in September, I was so anguished. I really wanted to run away. And a month after this, I was in Rio, starting to edit my film, and I got the pandemic in Rio, not at home, not in my window, not with my affections, far away in a city that I don't really know that well, or I didn't really know it so well. And now I know it deeply. And before I went there, I began to do some editing chronicles that were like a life instinct. That brain injury made it that I was very close to having a very bad outcome. It was something very, very hard for me. So I wanted to begin these chronicles as a way to bet on life. And they were during the pandemic. And one of the videos that I did, that I sent to the Beam, are parts of those chronicles. And the images were about what I felt about looking at that time. One, this video is what I look and what I say, just raw. On the other hand, for me, it was like discovering everything that I can live through outside the 4K. I was always waiting to get to Super 8, to get to 4K, with a certain reverence, when really I was always generating images. So to just surrender to these images that I generate instinctively. For me, to give over my intimacy was a way of surrendering my instinct for life. And these images of intimacy have to do with my relationship with Martin. We work together. We're very, very close friends. And I also have to be with him in something that for him was very complex. So my intimacy at that time. On the other hand, something that seemed foreign but really wasn't, which was to live through the protests against Bolsonaro. I think I filmed them every day at 8 o'clock. Every day there was a protest in Rio against Bolsonaro. I stayed in Rio. I tried to go back, but the conditions were not right. I had a very fragile immune system, and I stayed in Rio for 5 months thinking, okay, I'm going to try to finish the film at some point in the future, so I'll stay here. What can I do? And in that moment, I had a daily life that I had to construct and an intimacy with things that did not belong to me. The city wasn't mine, the window wasn't mine, those political conflicts weren't mine. Nothing was mine. It wasn't my bed, it wasn't my wall, it wasn't anything of me. I took 2 books. I took 2 because I was supposed to come back in March. I was supposed to travel for health controls. And I took 2 books, and thankfully, a friend of mine would send me a book every fortnight. So I would renew my reading material, and the images of intimacy at that point were to do with the instinct for life. And I filmed whatever took my fancy when it took my fancy. And 2 of these videos are just images that are generated just by filming. It is a material that is very emotional to me. That's what I think. Sometimes it's very hard to be emotional about what I film. I am too demanding sometimes. And those images are always moving and touching for me. I'm very thankful that they called me to do this because it was something. It seems that you generate a material. It is the situation. It is an intimate act to receive the call and to give something like this material for me. Thank you for sharing that. Martín?
Dale. Bueno, hola a todos.
Hello,
Gracias
everybody.
por la invitación. Me siento muy
Thank you
agradecido de
for the
participar
invite. I am so
de esta edición de la
thankful
BIM y de
to be part
esta
of
mesa
this
en particular.
BIM and this particular session.
Quería compartir algunas
I wanted to share
ideas que me fueron surgiendo a
some
lo largo
ideas
del proceso de hacer estos trabajos para la BIM.
that I came up with when I did this work
Como
for
comentaba
BIM.
Paz,
As
bueno,
Paz
yo
was
fui
saying,
invitado a participar
I was
del
invited to
proyecto
participate
a través de Paz.
for this
Y en ese
project
momento yo
through
estaba
PAS,
como
and I was
ya de
then
alguna manera empezando a trabajar en algunos materiales, a la vez que
beginning to
estaba
work on some
en un
things,
momento personal muy delicado, porque
and I
mi
was
padre
going through a
falleció
very
a principios de la cuarentena.
difficult personal time because my
Y en
dad
ese
died at the
contexto
beginning of the
bueno, de
quarantine
duelo, pero
period,
también
and within that
de una
grief
especie de
and that
extrañeza con el mundo y de perplejidad.
strangeness that I felt about
Me puse a
the
trabajar con
world
algunos
and that complexity,
materiales.
I
Creo
began
que
working
igual que
on some
muchos otros
materials.
trabajamos con
Like
imágenes,
many others,
estábamos
we work with
un poco
images, and we
pensando
were a
cuál
bit
podía ser
thinking
nuestro
about
lugar,
what
si era
could be
posible producir en el
our
contexto
place
de
and
la
how could we
pandemia, de
produce
qué
something
manera
in the
podíamos
context
hacerlo
of the
y sentir
pandemic and
que
how we could do it,
incluso estando en nuestras casas
and
podíamos
to feel
como
that
poner
even
algo
at
en
home
movimiento.
we could
Creo que
set something
muchos
in
artistas se
motion.
inclinaron
I think
por
a lot
empezar a
of
filmar lo que
artists
tenían a su alrededor de una
began by
manera más
filming what they had around them
inmediata,
in a more
su
immediate
casa,
way,
su
their
familia, mirar
house,
por
their
la ventana.
family, to look out the
Y
window.
creo que muchos artistas
And I
encontraron
think
como
many
imágenes
artists
muy
found
elocuentes en ese
images that were
sentido,
very eloquent,
pero a mí es como que no
but
me salió eso.
I couldn't do
Lo
that.
intenté un poco
I
y
tried,
me sentía
and
como
I
que
felt
me sentía muy detenido, sentía que no encontraba ninguna imagen
that I could not find any
que no
image
se
that
agotara muy
was
rápido, me daba ansiedad
fruitful
filmar mirando
enough.
por la ventana.
I got
Y
anxious
entonces
filming out the window,
me
so
puse a revisar algunos materiales
I
que yo ya
began to
tenía,
look through
materiales
some
de
archive
archivo,
material that I had,
de cosas que yo había filmado hace
things
tiempo
that I had
y de
filmed
cosas
a
que también
while
había ido
ago, and
acumulando.
things that I had
Yo soy
accumulated.
bastante como acumulador de
I am a bit
materiales
of
de
a
imágenes,
hoarder
digamos,
of
y en la pandemia un
images.
poco es como que
And the
me
pandemic,
radicalicé, digamos,
I became even more
y bueno,
radical.
me puse un poco
And I became
a revisar esas imágenes y había algo
somebody
que
who
era
would
llamativo
go
para
through
mí, que
these
era
images.
como
And what
que si
really
bien
caught
eran
my
imágenes
eye
de
was
diferentes
that although
fuentes
there were
y
images from
producidas en
different
diferentes
sources and
épocas,
produced in
todas como que me
different
dirigían
times,
mucho hacia
they all
hacia
took
el
me
presente y hacia
towards
esa
the
sensación que
present
tenía en
and
ese
that
momento,
sensation
como
that
de
I
una
had
pérdida total
then of a
de
complete
la noción
loss
de lo que es
of the
cotidiano, ¿no?
notion of daily
Y bueno, un
life.
poco con esa
And
sensación
with that
me puse
feeling,
me puse a
sensation,
editar y me di
I
cuenta que
started
para mí había
editing,
una
and I
conexión
realized
mucho
that
más
for
íntima
me,
con
there
esas
was a more
imágenes que yo estaba
intimate
editando
connection with
que con lo que
those
yo podía
images
llegar
that I was editing
a
than with the
filmar
ones that I
con las
could
herramientas que
possibly
tenía
film
en el
with the
lugar
tools I
en el que
had
estaba.
and in the place where I
Y un
was.
poco eso me hace
And
preguntarme, y me
that
parece
makes
una
me
pregunta como para
wonder
traer, para conversar acá, ¿por dónde
and
pasa
bring
ese
to this
vínculo
table,
de
where
intimidad que uno
does the
establece
relationship
con las
go
imágenes, ¿no?
when it comes to the intimacy with
Pienso un poco
images?
incluso en el
I'm
título de esta
also
mesa, que es
thinking
las
a bit
imágenes
about
de la
the name
intimidad,
of this
y
particular
hay hasta
session,
un desafío quizás
and there is a
como
challenge
sintáctico
even
en relación a eso,
in
digamos, si
terms
son
of
imágenes de la
syntax.
intimidad, si
Are
es que
these
encontramos
images of
intimidad en las
intimacy? Do we
imágenes,
find
si nos
intimacy
acercamos
in the
hacia esas
images?
imágenes
If
en
we
un tono
get
de
closer to
intimidad,
those images in an
me empecé a
intimate
hacer estas
way,
preguntas
I began asking
y a
myself
preguntarme
these
cómo cada
questions
uno
and to wonder
a su manera
how
conecta de
each
una
of
manera
us
íntima con una imagen, que creo que no tiene que ver
can
con
actually
la
work with
calidad que pueda
images.
tener esa
It doesn't
imagen en
have to
términos
do with the
técnicos, o con
quality, the
su valor,
technical
no sé,
quality,
estético, o con
or
su
their
proximidad
aesthetic
en términos
value, or the
espaciales o
possibilities
temporales, sino con
in
algo que es
space
mucho
or
más
time constraints,
misterioso
but
de alguna
something that is
manera,
much more
y que por eso también me parece
mysterious.
más interesante para
And
conversar.
that's why I
Y
think
nada,
it's
bueno,
an
a partir un
interesting
poco de
thing
que
to
me pasaba
talk
esto, de que me
about.
encontraba sintiendo una
And
conexión mucho más íntima revisando, por
I think
ejemplo,
I felt a
videos que había en
stronger
discos duros
connection
o incluso en el celular
going
de mi
through
papá,
hard disk
que filmando lo que
videos that
estaba
my dad
sucediendo para
had,
mí en
or
el
even his
presente,
cell
¿no?
phone, that filming what was happening now in the
Así que bueno,
present.
me quedo un poco con esa pregunta.
So that was my question.
Muchas gracias, Martín.
Thank you, Martin.
Gianfranco, tu turno.
Bueno, muchas gracias por la
Thank you
invitación.
for inviting me.
Para mí, estas instancias de
These
reflexión en torno a la
instances
imagen en movimiento
of
son
checking
sagradas. Creo
the
que nos
moving
encontramos
images are
como
sacred.
en un
We
momento
are
muy
facing
particular en
a very
donde
specific
hablaba
time
anteriormente, la
where
ficción y lo real
fiction
como que cohabitan.
and what's real are
Y
cohabiting.
bueno, me gustaría leer un
And
texto que
I
le
would like
mandé a
to
la
read a
BIM
text that I sent to the BEAM
cuando surge este llamado
when they called me
de cohabitar un espacio
about
virtual.
cohabiting into a
Yo,
virtual
como
space.
artista visual,
As
con
a visual
formación en cine,
artist
siempre,
in
y
film,
bueno, y con
I'm
formación en la UBA,
always,
ahí en la
after
ciudad
having been
universitaria,
educated in the University of Buenos
y
Aires,
con algunos maestros
and with
como
some teachers such
de
as
pasada, como el Carlos Trilnik,
Carlos Trilnik,
y bueno, y mucha gente
and a lot of people
que
who
tiene como una cercanía con la imagen en
have
movimiento desde
a relationship with the moving
lenguaje de la
image
imagen en
from the
movimiento
language
que
of
hace
moving image that
que
makes
se
it
distancie de todo el
so
resto
that
de las
they are
artes, ¿no?
distanced
Y
from
que
all
hoy
the other arts. And today,
nos- estamos muy cerca de que las
we
imágenes
are
nos controlen físicamente y
images can
mentalmente.
actually
O sea,
control
estamos
us mentally and
muy
physically.
expuestos a la
We are
imagen en
very
movimiento, sobre
exposed
todo
to the
las
moving image,
generaciones
especially the
venideras, ¿no? Los
generations
más chicos,
that come,
que
the
ya
younger generation, the
todo
kids.
pasa o está mediado
Everything
por las
is
imágenes
mediated
en
by
movimiento.
the images.
Entonces eso me inspira un poco
So
a
that
escribir este
inspired
texto en el
me to
contexto de la
read this
pandemia que les voy a
text,
leer ahora.
something that I'm going to read
Hablar de la
now.
imagen en
To
movimiento en el
speak about
marco de
the
una
moving
Bienal
image
latinoamericana me
within a
conmueve y me
Latin
parece
American Biennale
revolucionario
moves me
por
and
una
seems to me
cuestión de lenguaje.
revolutionary due to
El
the language
cine es
expressed.
un monopolio y la
Film is a
televisión ha
monopoly
sido
and TV
programada
has
para
been
mal
programmed
educarnos y
to
generar deudas.
miseducate us and to
Los
generate
políticos de izquierda y
doubt.
derecha han firmado un
Politicians from the
documento que
right
los
and the left have
obliga a
signed
hablar,
a
a
document that
actuar como
forces them
robots
act
y
like robots
obedecer órdenes
and
de
to obey
corporaciones y
orders
estados
from
extranjeros que
corporations and
promueven
foreign
la
states
corrupción,
who promote
manipulando la
corruption,
democracia para
manipulating
despojarnos
our
de los
democracy in
territorios,
order to
de
get us
nuestros
out of our
derechos,
territories,
libertades, pero
our
sobre todo
rights,
de
our
nuestra memoria.
freedoms, and especially our
Somos
memories.
víctimas del
We are
desarraigo.
victims of
La naturaleza
not
arde en el
belonging.
corazón de la Amazonía y el
Nature
Congo, y
is
la
burning in the heart of
tecnología
the
sigue
Amazon and
avanzando con
Congo, and
fines
technology
extractivos.
keeps advancing
La
to
comunidad
extract
científica nos ha
resources. The
alertado de que
scientific
vivimos una crisis
community has
ambiental
told us that we're
global
going
e
through a
irreversible.
global, irreversible
Somos testigos
environmental
en vivo
crisis,
del
and we are
derretimiento de los polos, de
witnesses
los
of
estallidos
the
sociales y del
social
confinamiento de toda la humanidad
protest,
debido
the
a la
confinement
expansión
of the
del
whole
virus
of humanity due to
COVID-19
the
hasta
expansion
ahora
of the
sin
virus
cura.
COVID-19, which has
Pero mi
no
carta
cure.
no es sobre fines de mundos.
But
Está
I am
dirigida
not
más
talking
bien
about the
con
end of the
ánimos de
world.
cambiar
I
formas
think we should
que hacen
change
de
ways
nuestro medio un
that
lugar chato,
make our media
aburrido en
something
portugués.
flat, bored,
Cánones que imperan
boring,
gracias al desarrollo
canons
de una industria
that
que no
have to do
necesariamente
with the development
contribuye
of
al
the industry that
enriquecimiento del
doesn't
lenguaje
necessarily
audiovisual.
contribute to
Si
enriching
consideráramos las
audiovisual language. If we
cosmovisiones no
considered
antropocéntricas de los
cosmovisions
pueblos
not
originarios,
as
perfectamente podríamos hablar de un
anthropocentric,
planeta agua,
we
de
could
un
speak
mundo
of a planet of
biodiverso,
water, a
de tiempos
biodiverse world,
absolutamente variables.
times that are
En
completely
este sentido,
variable.
la
And in
globalización
this sense,
no ha sido más que un
globalization
concepto
has just
ficcionado por
been
el
a
neoliberalismo
fictional,
para ser utilizado como una
invented
herramienta de control
idea
social,
by the
territorial y económico.
neoliberalism to
Cada
be able to
lugar
use
está
it as a tool.
sujeto a su propio tiempo,
Each
siendo
place is
esta su
set in its
principal
own
virtud.
time, and that is its main
Pero
virtue.
me interesa
I am
contarles
interested
en
to tell
resumen
you
que la obra que les envío a la
that
BIM fue
the
realizada a
work I
través
am
de un
sending to
encuadre
BIM
vertical,
was
ya que mis
made through
investigaciones actuales
digital,
buscan
and my
utilizar el
research
video para
wants
acercar
to
el
use
cielo con la
video
tierra y
to
viceversa, observar
get
detenidamente la luz
the earth
y
closer to the
consigo
sky,
representar una
to use
difuminada
light in a
gama de
different
tonos
way,
monocromos
and to have
presentes en la cima de una
monochrome
montaña
uh,
en el paisaje.
tones from the
Aquí mi
landscape.
fascinación,
My
ventana que me hace
fascination,
escapar del
and
encierro
that is a
y la
window that
enfermedad.
helps me get out of my
Les dejo
confinement
entonces
and
la invitación
disease.
a girar sus
I
pantallas
invite you
durante esta
to
quinta Bienal de
turn
Imagen Movimiento
your
realizada
screens
del otro
over
lado de la cordillera de los Andes.
to see what's going on beyond
Con
the
esta carta
Andes.
un poco
With this
confluyen
letter, there is a
varios temas,
confluence
¿no? Yo
of
quise hacer
many
ahí una sopa de
subjects. I wanted to create a
reflexiones
mix of
que tienen que ver un
thoughts
poco con
that
lo que
have to
contaba
do with
anteriormente de esta
what I was saying before with
este,
regards to
también este gran poder
the
que
big
de las
power
imágenes en movimiento
that the moving image has
para generar una concepción
to
de un mundo que
generate
para mí
the conception of
no
a
es el mundo en
world
que vivimos. O sea,
that is not the
nosotros
world
hemos
we live in.
sido víctimas
Are
de cierta manera
victims
de las imágenes
in
en
a way
movimiento,
of
porque
the
todo el
moving
concepto de la
image, because
globalización está
the concept of
basado
globalization
en
is
que vivimos
based
en un mundo
on us living in a world
común, donde hay,
that is common
por
to all of
ejemplo,
us,
un
where, for
tiempo
example,
común.
we have
Vivimos
a
al mismo
common
tiempo.
time. We all live at the
Yo,
same
por lo
time.
menos, soy un artista, una persona
I am an artist, a
que
person
reconoce que
who
vivimos en un
recognizes
mundo
that we are living
multitemporal. No
in a
existen tiempos
multi-temporal time. There are
que
no
sean comunes.
times that are
Es más,
common to
hoy,
everybody. What's
ahora
more,
nosotros
we are now,
son las 8 de la noche
it's
y
8 p.m.,
en el otro extremo de la Tierra
but on
ya
the other
es
side of the
futuro,
world, it is the future.
ya es mañana.
It is
O sea,
tomorrow.
nosotros podríamos decir que en
So we could say
en este hemisferio del mundo
that
se
in this
vive
hemisphere,
constantemente en el pasado.
we live
Y
in the
esa es una
past.
realidad.
And that is
Porque,
the
por
reality.
ejemplo,
Because
comercialmente,
commercially,
tener una ventaja
to
de
have
12
an
horas
advantage of 12
es
hours
es imposible como recuperar ese tiempo
it's
perdido,
impossible to
¿no?
recover that lost time.
los seres que habitan otros hemisferios
The beings who inhabit
consideran
different
esta variable
hemispheres
para
consider
articular
this variable to
su
articulate
manera de enfrentar la vida
their
y
way
el
of
mundo.
facing life and
Lo mismo
world.
ocurre con las
The
tecnologías,
same with
¿no?
technologies.
Hablamos, la imagen en
We-
movimiento surge por una
Moving
tecnología
image comes through
específica
a specific
que,
technology
bueno, que ha conquistado
that
el mundo. Sin
is
esa
conquering the
tecnología, la
world.
imagen en
Without that
movimiento
technology, the moving image would
no
not
tendría lugar, ¿no?
have
Llámese cine
a
y
reason to be,
luego
whether it's film
video,
and then
¿no?
video.
Entonces, también
So
las tecnologías hacen que nosotros
technology
vivamos de una u otra manera,
make
¿no?
us
Y hace que los modos de vida sean tan disímiles entre un lugar y otro.
modes of being
¿no?
are
O sea,
so
también, por
remote.
ejemplo, acá en Chile tenemos
Here in Chile,
como todo una
we have
triste historia en relación a los
the
medios
sad story with regards to the media
de transporte, ¿no?
of transportation.
Durante la dictadura
During
el
the
proyecto
dictatorship,
de que existiera un
the
tren que
project of
atravesara
having
todo el territorio chileno, que
a
es muy
train that would
largo,
go through the
entonces
whole
el tren se
Chilean
hace aún más
territory,
eficiente que
and it becomes
probablemente en
more
cualquier otro
efficient
país en
than
el mundo,
probably any other
porque es
country in the world
una
because
sola línea de norte a sur,
it
digamos,
would be just one
o de
line
sur
from
a
north to
norte.
south or from south to north.
No existe. El sistema de trenes fue por
The
temas
system of
políticos
trains is due to
sacado,
political
¿no? Y
reasons
hoy
taken out,
hay un
and
poder de los camioneros enorme,
there is an
y eso
enormous
hace
power by the truck drivers,
que
and that makes it so that
nosotros vivamos un poco
we live
sin esta posibilidad
without
tecnológica
the
que
technological
genera
chance
como
that is
otro tipo de
generated
conexiones. En este
by
caso
other kinds
también
of
sería
connections.
síndrome de la
This would be
descentralización,
the
¿no?
syndrome of
Entonces,
decentralization.
otra de las cosas que también
One of the other things
es muy contemporáneo en nuestros
that is very
tiempos es haber
contemporary
pensado que las
is to have
respuestas
thought that the
de
responses
una sociedad progresista
of a progressive
eh,
society
existían en las grandes ciudades, ¿no?
existed in the big
Se
cities.
construyen las grandes ciudades y se
They are
forman estas
constructed
grandes
in the big
ciudades
cities. These big cities
que
are
son como el gran ícono del
developed, and these
progreso
are
de
the
la
great
humanidad
icon of the
y
progress of
hoy
mankind. And today,
nos damos cuenta,
we
creo, ante
realize, I
esta
think,
crisis,
in this
que
crisis,
quizás el
that
progreso
perhaps
va por otro
progress
lado, ¿no?
goes through a different channel,
Porque ya las grandes ciudades están
because
altamente contaminadas, ya
great cities are
las grandes
highly
ciudades están
contaminated.
desertificadas, ya los problemas
They
sociales
are
que generan las
the
grandes ciudades,
social problems
como han
that
sido
they
tapados
entail,
de mala forma,
because they have not been
vuelven,
sorted out, come back,
porque las comunidades,
because
las pequeñas comunidades
the
se
small
han ido destruyendo,
communities
los barrios se
have
han ido
been
destruyendo,
destroyed,
los
the
valores,
neighborhoods have been
los
destroyed, the
valores cívicos
values,
dentro de las grandes
civic
ciudades,
values within the big cities have been
potenciarse,
destroyed instead of being
se han un
enhanced.
poco disuelto.
They have been
Yo lo hablo
dissolved. I'm speaking
de
from
Chile, por ejemplo, donde
Chile, for example.
ya la educación cívica fue
The
sacado hace mucho tiempo
civic education was taken out of the
de la educación
curriculum a long
primaria.
time ago.
Entonces,
If we go back to this reflection with regards to big cities, how today the pandemic, thinking a bit about the video that you brought to the BIM, the city appears to be slow and to exist in a different time that is manifested also in other videos towards an invitation to recognize the dimension of what has been stopped, of what is brought to a halt, perhaps also as a way to think of ourselves in political terms. I wanted to mention something that Gustavo was saying as well with regards to the human fragility. The only certainty is human frailty, he said. And in that sense, going back to the issue at hand, the images of intimacy, how those images of the hand, which we could see live by Andrés in Plaza de Mayo, the images of the hand, when we have a camera in our hand, a camera that when you don't need an camera operator, just a handheld camera close to your body, and even if you're filming a very collective manifestation or protest, it is inscribed in the body and it becomes an image of intimacy, that dimension of intimacy that is opened to others, open towards the multiple and other dimensions that go beyond subjectivity. Gaby, do you want to comment? You're muted, Gaby.
Casi como que esta mesa
This session
una respuesta, es una devolución
is
a las primeras
something
intuiciones que tuvimos
that has to do with the first intuitions we had with regards to this project.
todas las intervenciones,
All of the interventions
escuchar todas las intervenciones y los textos que
and the
leyeron,
texts that you read is almost like a response. Why to do something? How can we look into each other's eyes?
esto que contaba Paz de
What Paz was saying with regards to capturing something
fragilidad que mencionaba
and the fragility that Gustavo mentioned,
de esas imágenes tan
those images that are so
apenas perceptibles, esos movimientos apenas perceptibles,
those
o,
movements that are
digamos,
very
que esta posibilidad de
perceptible,
¿no?
the possibility of knowing what to see, how to look, what to say. This session is full of those questions. How to look at the other one, the intimacy that has to do with how we can connect to others. I think that is a very inspiring concept. And it encourages us to delve into these issues. And this is what I was saying, to get out of the 4K, the Super 8, because with an iPhone, we had enough to say what you wanted to say at the time with that emotion. When we were saying the shaft of light that comes through the window, that's something to be shared. The time of perception, the time of looking at things is everything, just reflections.
Quizás desde el lado de la hechura, de por qué todos estos
Within thinking about why we called on you to be at this session, and also how we thought of this project. Ali didn't say it at the beginning, but we began to invite people timidly, and we said how our friends would react to see. It was like a bottle thrown into the sea to see what would happen. We didn't know what we would receive for these works. And then we began thinking about it, and we decided there were 4 instances to look at, to look within oneself, through the window, towards our home. And then within those 4 lines that we had, we found words or descriptions that united many videos, and those were the things that managed to get the videos. Sometimes this may seem random, but when you do it, it is structured by tabs. There are videos that have to do with looking at nature, looking at the sky, looking at a tree, looking at the time that passes by, things that may have to do with this works, and everything is, there's a cat in one, a cat in the other, and it is united by those keywords when you search for videos. So it was a bit like, from the programming point of view, to have the power to generate encounters and to set up a table that we felt it was a nice thing to do it this way. It was our way of proposing artists who did not know each other from getting to meet each other.
Sí, hay Paz quería hablar, creo. Estaba
Yes,
con
Paz wanted to say
el
something,
micrófono apagado.
but she's muted.
Yo me había
I was,
preparado para hoy un pequeño texto
I had prepared a small
que me
text
llevaba un
to
poco
read
a esto
that
también.
took me a bit
Quizás
towards
algunos
what we've
o
been
la
speaking
mayoría de los
about,
que estamos acá aprendimos un
because
poco de
most of the ones
Mecas,
who are here learned a bit from Mekas,
el impulso de salir a
the wonder of
generar
the
una imagen,
impulse to generate
como
images,
si eso ya nos estuviera
as if
esperando,
that
no sé
was
si
already
encontramos
awaiting
esa
us.
imagen o esa imagen ya estaba,
We
pero
don't know whether we
un poco
came
a
out to find that image or whether the image was there waiting for us.
es un pequeño texto de
It is a
Mecas,
small
en el camino de
text.
cuando en cuando vislumbré breves momentos de
I
belleza.
saw brief moments of beauty in the way. Without knowing, unconsciously, we all take within ourselves, somewhere deep inside, some images of paradise. They may not be images, but just a vague feeling of having been somewhere. There are places where we find ourselves and our lives. I have been in those places where I have felt they must have been paradise, or they were paradise, or maybe they were paradise, or something like that, a small fragment of paradise. Not only in places, I've been with friends, we've been together many times, and we have felt a sense of union. I think this was part of all of these images, to feel a certain sense of union with somebody. I wrote, because I came from reading this, of having felt less alone with this abysmal thing that the pandemic meant. And I also feel that we go back to that first gaze. I don't know whether that gaze is stopped or quite, I think Gustavo has a very pure gaze in that sense. But in some way, we are all taking a picture with our cell phone constantly. We're recording, we use the devices all the time. And in some way, this was returning to that first image, to this context, this timid first gaze, and to review our daily lives, which is ourselves. And I think that that register is what is here. And I think that is a very intimate thing. And you wonder, what is intimacy on the other hand? And I think at that time, I think one of those months, I spoke to Martin and I said, it is strange because things that are common to everybody, brushing our teeth, going to the loo, what is intimate to me is what I feel or what I look at. It is something very intimate. And I think that's what we could share now. What do we look at when we are alone? What do we look at when we are facing something as abysmal as the pandemic, as strange as not controlling what's going to happen tomorrow, something that we're not used to? We knew that this what we were going to do tomorrow, but now there is a new time and places that are finding a place and a time that are our own. That's something that has been difficult. And I also think about what Gustavo said. When I saw his films, in some sense, I felt this film can hug me, embrace me, can look at me. And to go back to that first look, gaze made us all feel closer or with the ability to embrace each other. That was my feeling when Andres called me to be here then. And I began to speak to Andres a lot more. I've been friends for many years, but sometimes we speak more and sometimes we speak less. I began being very connected to him again. And I do have that capability to embrace somebody, be together. And for me, that is the sense of movie making, filmmaking.
Sí, yo comparto con Paz un poco esta idea de que
I share with
lo
Paz the
íntimo no
idea that
necesariamente tiene
what
que ver con
is intimate
lo que ocurre dentro del hogar, sino
is not what happens within the
con esa
home,
afinidad
but the
que tiene
affinity
uno
that you may have
como artista con,
as an
en este caso,
artist,
con la cámara, ¿no?
in this
Como
case with
los
the camera,
ejercicios,
the exercises,
lo que está observando.
what is being
En este caso,
observed.
para mí, cuando Gabriela me
In this
dijo,
sense,
mándame
when
un
Gabriela
video
said, send me a video,
horizontala, y yo pataleé porque llevo
I
mucho tiempo como
was
en esta
concerned
cosa
because it takes a lot of
de
time
someterme a la
to
verticalidad, y eso me
commit
permite
myself,
como
and
generar
that
una
allows me
tensión
to generate attention
desde la composición
from the
que es
composition
imposible de hacer en la
that is possible
horizontalidad.
to have
Entonces,
horizontality.
claro, lo íntimo en mi caso
What is
es esa
intimate in my
como
sense, in my case, is
a
to
partir
expose
de esta invitación a la
from
BIM,
this invite to the beam
esa búsqueda que
that
quizás no es narrativa, ¿no? Y
searching for something that
esa
is not
narrativa,
narrative, and that
ese gesto narrativo es algo que tiene
narrative gesture is something
que tiene que desarrollar
that has to
la
be
persona
developed
que está observando,
by the
¿no? O
person
sea,
who is
es una
observing.
imagen que
It
más que llena
is
está
an
vacía,
image that
¿no?
is not
Y más que
full, it is empty,
móvil, inmóvil, y más que llena de
and
colores,
it is not
en tono
full of
absolutamente
colors,
monocromático,
it is
¿no?
monochrome.
Entonces, toda esa serie de
So
limitaciones
all of that, those
formales,
limitations,
de una u otra manera,
those formal
yo creo
limitations,
que también
also
va por el lado de cuestionar un lenguaje que muchas
go
veces se torna
towards
como
questioning in a language that
muy lleno de
is
colores, muy lleno
very
de
full of color,
imágenes,
full of images,
y pareciera que la imagen
and it would
movimiento
seem
solamente
that the
mucha
moving image
manipulación de las cosas
is very much manipulated
que no necesariamente está habla
with things that are
del formato
do not
o
necessarily
el medio
speak
en sí,
about
¿no? Hay
the
como,
media itself.
me encanta la idea de la Bienal por lo mismo, ¿no? Porque a
I
diferencia
love
de
the
otras
idea of the
series de
Biennale
instancias en
because
donde
besides
la
from
imagen
other
en
instances
movimiento
where the
tiene que
moving
ser
image
como presentada de una forma, y esa
has to be
forma
presented in a certain way, and that way
genera como
generates
un contexto en donde
a
la imagen en
context
movimiento
where the
no
moving
puede
image
desligarse. Entonces,
cannot be
me
separated. So
parece muy sensato y
I
atractivo
think it is very
como este
sensible and
mundo de
attractive,
imágenes
this world of images,
que la imagen en movimiento, como por
where the
ejemplo
moving
lo que
image, for
ocurría en la UBA
example,
de
what
la
happened
imagen y el sonido,
in the
¿no?
images
Que
and
arma una
sound
dimensión
that
nueva, ¿no? Que
generate
no
a new
está regida por el
dimension
canon del cine ni
that
ni
has
del video
nothing to do with the
experimental,
canon of
sino ya
experimental
es
video or
un
film, but
camino
it is
en donde
a path
no sé, hay una dimensión que me
where there
parece
is a dimension
que súper
that
interesante de ver, pero
very
a la vez
interesting
también
to look at
de reflexionar, ¿no?
and to
Sobre la
reflect
imagen en
upon
movimiento,
with
cuál es el
regards
rol.
to
Y
the
eso un poco
moving
planteo
image.
esta pregunta aquí
And I ask for that
a todas las
with
personas
this
de la mesa,
question
¿no?
of
¿Qué
everybody who
piensan
is here. What do you
del
think
poder de la imagen en movimiento
about the
hoy?
power of the
Porque
moving image
sin
nowadays?
duda estamos en
Because
un momento
we are
que cada día,
at a point where every day,
o sea, no sé, volviendo al tema de las ciudades
I don't
están
know, going back
llenas
to
de
the
cámaras,
cities are full
¿no?
of
Cámaras que no
cameras.
solamente te
Cameras that
graban,
not
sino
only
también saben
record you, but they also
perfectamente
know exactly
quiénes son los sujetos,
who the subjects are.
porque ya reconocen las temperaturas
They
del cuerpo,
recognize even the
reconocen
temperature of the bodies,
los rasgos de las caras,
the
entonces
facial
vivimos
features. So we
o sea,
live
toda esta como fantasía del gran hermano,
the
¿no? Y este
fantasy
ojo
of
que
Big
constantemente te
Brother,
está
the eye that is
observando, que antes era
constantly looking
netamente
at
como una
us,
ficción,
that was like
una
fictional
cosa de
before.
hablar de un mundo
It
futuro.
was a
Hoy
bit to do
vivimos en ese
with the
mundo y la tecnología al
future, but now
parecer
we live in that world, and technology
eh,
seems
va desde ese lado. Entonces nosotros
to be
como
going
también como artistas creo que tenemos
to
una
that
responsabilidad
path. And
enorme
as
de poder
artists,
un
it
poco
is our
parar la
responsibility
máquina
to
y
be able to
cuestionar la
stop
tecnología.
and to question technology.
Porque claramente la
Because
cámara,
clearly, sorry to interrupt, but going back to intimacy, Gustavo, you had asked for the floor. Very brief. I was thinking about a couple of things that Paz said. She used the word impulse, and I think what happens was we went through a double impulse, an impulse towards within, forced to look at our own feelings, our emotions, and our intimacy, and an impulse towards the other, the need of somebody else, of the contact to somebody else, the absence of somebody else, somebody else's voice. That double movement was very, very strong. I was thinking about, Paz was saying about whether images are looking at us. I always think that when you are getting to my age, it is very easy for have our gaze be static. And I think you don't become fossilized as long as you make an effort, which is pretty difficult, not just to look at something, but to have images look at us, how we are looked at by the images and how that breaks or at least repairs the fossilization of our gaze, which is a very strong temptation. I wanted to say that Karina Granieri shared a text that has a lot to do with what we're talking about. So be aware of the chat. It's very interesting what she put there. Karina, would you like to read that?
Lo leo. Lo íntimo de Julia
What is
Kristeva.
Intimate by Julia Kristeva. The intimate is an index. Can you hear me? What's intimate is an index of a subjectivity that everybody mentions, that we all mention frequently. It's not corresponding to the pulsional inside that would be opposed to the outside of outer excitation or the abstraction of conscience, because the representations, the representation which are internally represented for pulsions and sensations and the thinking being occupy perfectly that stage that when you look at it results pretty spacious and which opinion calls the intimate. This comes from the Latin intimus, which is a superlative of the interior, what is most inner, the intimate, which encompasses the unconscious and does not seem to reduce itself to that, but to completely overflow it. I remember this text by Julia Kristeva. Thank you, Karina, for reading that.
Sí, perdón, yo quiero...
Sorry. I was interested in the fact that Mariana may speak because her videos have to do with something that Paz said when it comes to not being in her place and not knowing whether she should go back and to look at a different place that is not her home. I don't know if you would like to make some comments about that.
Y justo estaba pensando que, bueno, que
I was thinking
lo que compartía Paz también
that what Paz
me
said
resonaba en esto
also resonated
de
within
cómo
me
también
about
la migración
how
de la BIM cómo permitió también
this
movilizar
allowed
algo de
us
eso
to
íntimo que a veces
bring
nos
what was
cuesta
intimate
movilizar hacia afuera, ¿no? Como que también fue una
and that
oportunidad, me
sometimes it's
parece,
hard
fue
to move
ese doble
outwards.
impulso, ¿no? De estar en
That
medio de una situación
double impulse of being within a situation
particular,
that
sumamente
is
inédita
pretty
o
specific and
inesperada,
has never
tener ese
happened before
impulso
and
de
unexpected, and
registrarlo,
to
pero
have the
que
impulse
creo
of
que la
registering
invitación
it,
por ahí de la Bienal fue
but
muy,
having
muy
the
valiosa en el sentido
limitation,
de que ese primer impulso de registrar
that first impulse that we had
situación inédita tenga
of this
vehículo,
idea
pueda también
had a
movilizarse
vehicle,
y
or
abrirse
it could be
a ser compartida.
shared.
No conté al principio, pero bueno, en mi caso
I didn't say at the beginning, but
los videos
in
yo
my
también
case,
los llamé videonotas
for the videos, what
porque justamente
I
me
call them
costaba
video
bastante
notes
como
because
pensarlos todavía como
I was worried about thinking of them
proyecto o una idea
as a
más bien
project
cerrada,
or
sino que me
a
parecía que
closed
era
idea, but I thought
justamente la necesidad de tomar unas notas
there was the need to take some
en
notes
medio de una situación que fue
in
también
the midst of a
encontrarme en otro
situation
país cuando fue
that meant that I
el
was also in
inicio,
a
digamos,
different
de la
country when the
cuarentena,
pandemic began.
de encontrarme que no sabía si podía
I didn't
volver
know
o no
whether
volver.
I could come back or
Y
not.
en medio de eso, ¿no? Como tomar algunos apuntes
And
que tomé,
to
algunas
take some
imágenes que registré,
images
digamos,
that I
volviendo
recorded
estaba en
coming
Francia en
back
ese momento,
from, I was in France.
que bueno, llegué a volver ahí muy
I managed
justito.
to get
Y después
back
la
just
experiencia de
in
estar
time.
en
And
nuestros
the experience
hoteles que se transformaban en
of
hospital
being
por
in
un tiempo para las
hotels that
personas que
became
venían de otros países,
hospitals
sobre
for a
todo
bit
por
for
el
people who
principio
came
los inicios de la
at the
cuarentena.
beginning of the quarantine and
Y
had to
bueno,
stay in a
esa
hotel for a
situación
couple
también
of
de lo
weeks.
temporal
And
que
that
comentaron, que fue como muy particular, ¿no?
temporary
Ese tiempo
situation, which
que
was
no
so
solamente un tiempo detenido
weird,
en
it was
términos
like a time that
en
was
términos esto, como
floating
decía
in
Gustavo, no es
suspension.
ese tiempo que
Like Gustavo
nos dan la
said,
posibilidad de
it
quedarnos
is a
adentro
time
para
that
registrar,
allows
pero
us to stay
digamos,
within,
en
but
nuestras casas, pero digamos
in our houses, but
con la intención,
with
sino
the
como este
intent.
encuentro de estar en un hotel, que uno diría,
Oh,
bueno,
it
estar en
was
un hotel,
weird
pero estar
because
en
I
un
was
hotel
in a
15
hotel,
días
but a hotel
sin poder
for
salir al
15 days that
pasillo,
I couldn't really go out into the
sin
hallway
poder
or anything
hablar con
without
nadie,
being able to speak
te
to
encontrás con un
anybody,
montón de gente en el mismo lugar que no sabe qué le
in
decís a
spite of
enfermos,
the fact
digamos,
that there were many
fue una
people there
situación
in that
bastante
hotel.
extrema.
It was a very extreme
Pero también
situation.
encontrar en esa
And I
situación
also
extrema
found in
cómo
that
las
extreme
personas encontraban los
situation
modos de
how people found the
encontrarse, por
way
ejemplo, a través de las ventanas
to talk to
y
each
de
other
compartir sus
through the
angustias, o
windows
personas que salían a la
and to
ventana a
share
tocar, tenían, no sé, una guitarra y salían a
their
las
worry,
balcones,
or if they had a
tocaban,
guitar, they
tocaban
would
hacia la
go and
calle, ¿no? Como,
play
como este doble impulso que
play a
estábamos
song. There
hablando,
was
¿no?
an
Un poco de
impulse to share
vernos impedidos o,
and to
o
see
tener
each
que
other,
mirarnos, y por otro lado esa necesidad que nos brota al
the
instante,
need
necesidad de salir
to
también.
actually go out was
Así que
used
para mí,
as a
digamos,
means to share.
compartir estos
So
materiales,
to
compartir estos
share
videos
this
también fue
material
como
in this video
un
for me was
desafío,
a
no solo
challenge,
el haber pasado la situación,
not
sino
only to
también fue un
have gone
desafío
through that
esto de
situation, but
mostrarlos,
also
¿no?
to
Para mí fue
show
como
them.
bastante
For
fuerte.
me, it was pretty
Tardé unos meses, de hecho,
intense.
desde
It
que
took
Gaby
me a
me dijo
while.
si me animaba a compartir
Since
algo,
Ari
tardé unos
asked me
meses
to
en
share
animarme
something,
a
it
ver
took
ese
me a while
material, ¿no?
to
Una vez que volví a mi casa
dare
era como
to
que eso había
watch that
quedado ahí.
stuff that I had filmed.
Y volver a
That was
verlos
kept to a side, but to watch them again and to
llegué a la
have to
conclusión de
choose
que podía
images.
hacer en principio
And I
esas
got
videonotas,
to the
como esos
conclusion
primeros
that I
apuntes
could
de algo
do
que estaba como
some
todavía muy
notes,
fresco.
like something that
Y
was
algo
very,
de
very
esto de la
still
intimidad también me parece que
in
tiene que ver con
the
esa,
forefront of my mind.
con
And
esto que
the
decía Paz,
intimacy
de que
has to
son
do with
imágenes que
what
todavía
Paz
a mí
was
me
saying. These are
emocionan mucho,
images
que
that
no las
are
puedo
very
como
moving to me,
procesar,
that I cannot think of them
con distancia. Son como muy próximas.
from a
Siento que
distance.
son
They are
imágenes
too
muy
close.
próximas y me gustó un
I
montón
feel
escuchar
I loved listening to
esta idea, ¿no? De que las
this
imágenes
idea
de la
that the
intimidad
images
tiene que ver con
of
esa,
the
esa
intimacy have to
proximidad a
do with
las
this
imágenes que
proximity
estamos
to the
generando o que nos
images
están encontrando.
that we
Eso me
generate
pareció
or that
así
are finding us.
muy, muy hermoso
I think
en
that was
relación a
very
la
beautiful
pregunta que me
with
surgió a
regards
mí
to the
como
question
disparadora.
that I had,
Sí,
that to me was a trigger for all the subject.
sí.
I'd like to describe something that happened when I looked at Marian's first video, which is Hospital 1, Hotel Hospital 1, and which brings me to this question of what are the images of intimacy or where intimacy lies. The first video she had is a fixed take of a window, shot of a window from a window, where you can see another window and you can see a shadow on the other window. You can hear Mariana's voice, who is on the phone and is trying to find the way to come back to Buenos Aires from France. And she's talking about the embassy and the tickets. And at one point, a person on the other side of the window gets closer, comes out to the balcony to send a WhatsApp message. She can see that there's a camera. They can see they're being filmed. And there was a gesture that really surprised me, because the first gesture of that lady is to close the window. She gestures towards closing the window, but she stops and she doesn't. She doesn't close the window and she remains there sending her message, and then she looks at the camera. And I thought it was very interesting and very expressive, because I was wondering, where is intimacy nowadays? And at some point I feel the intimacy is in the public space. I feel that that lady decided to allow herself being filmed in her window from the window across the way. And in that sense, I think I want to bring to the table, to the discussion, this political call that we've been hearing, which is what is intimate is political. It is not a new statement. In the performance arts arena, it was there in the 80s. What is intimate is political, especially in the first wave of feminism. But what do you think with regards to this statement, what is intimate is political, when it comes to your work? I'd like to ask you that.
¿Quién se lanza el piquero, como dicen?
Okay, who
No, de
will
todas
go
maneras, o
first?
sea, yo creo que,
I think,
de nuevo, o sea, si hablamos de un
again, if we're
lenguaje,
speaking about language,
lo íntimo necesariamente tiene que
intimate
ver
necessarily has
con
to
una
do with
búsqueda propia
looking for
y
something,
eso
and that
tiene que ver con
has to
un
do
acto
with
o un gesto político, o sea,
an
lo
act or a
político está en
political
todo,
gesture.
¿no? O sea,
The
hay
political is
distintas
everywhere.
formas de
There are different ways
entrar a lo político. Para
of
mí,
going into the
en
political.
el arte,
In art,
lo político pasa también por
what is political
por las formas,
also
¿no?
has to
Y las
do
formas como
with
está concebido
the ways
el lenguaje, en este caso de la
that
imagen en
language is
movimiento.
conceived. In this
Entonces,
way,
cuestionar
in
esas
this case,
formas
the moving image, to
es como
question that
algo
as a
que para mí es muy es muy
as
clave,
something
muy
which is
íntimo y muy
very
político a la vez.
key, very intimate and very
No
political.
necesariamente
And I think
observando lo que
it's not by
políticamente
necessarily
es correcto.
observing
Por
what is
ejemplo, en el
politically
caso de
correct.
Chile,
In the
que
case
hay
of Chile,
toda
for
una
example,
revolución
there is
nueva,
a
digamos, muy
revolution
candente.
which is
Acabamos
new
de tener una votación
and
popular
intense. We've just had a
hace
popular
algunos días
vote
que
with
hace
a few days
que
ago
todo entremos en un proceso
so that we all go
renovación de
to
una
a renewal
constitución que fue hecha
process for the
durante la
constitution that
dictadura,
was drafted during the
¿no? Y es un
dictatorship.
proceso constituyente, de eso quiere
And
decir
this
que
is a
en
constitutive
términos,
process, which
el mensaje es
the
que la clase
message is that
política
the political class
no representa
does not
realmente a los
represent
ciudadanos. Entonces los
the
ciudadanos
citizens. So the
buscan
citizens are
que la clase política cambie,
wanting the
entonces
political
la
class to
participación
change.
ciudadana
So the
genera como
participation of
un
the
lugar
citizens generates
real
a real
dentro de una
place
conversación política
within
que hoy
a
está
political
muy
conversation that is now
polarizada, ¿no?
very polarized.
Entonces, creo que muchas imágenes políticamente
I think a lot of the
correctas han sido las
images that
imágenes
are
del
politically correct
conflicto
are
en
the
la
ones
calle,
that were
¿no?
about the
Entonces,
conflict on the
todo lo que
streets.
se ve,
Everything that
todo
we
lo que se ve
see
en la televisión, todo
on
lo que se
TV,
ve en el celular, todo lo que se
on your
ve
cell phone,
mediante las imágenes de movimiento,
through moving
son las
images,
personas
are
y las situaciones
people
de
and
violencia o no
situations,
violencia en la
whether
calle,
violent or non-violent, on the streets,
generando también como
generating,
que me parece que es natural, ¿no? Pero
which
a
I
la
think
vez,
is natural,
a
but
mí por lo menos me hace cuestionar
I
si
question
ese es el
whether
camino que
that is
a mí
the
me
right
interesa, ¿no?
path that I am
Porque
interested
en
in,
pro de esta saturación de
because
imágenes,
the saturation of
de
images,
cierto tipo de imágenes,
of certain type of
también
images,
yo creo que político tiene que ver
I think what is
con tener la
political
libertad de poder
is to
generar
do with the
imágenes que
freedom
hablen
to be able to generate
de
images
otro
that
tipo de
speak
cosas, ¿no?
to other things.
Y en este caso, en
And
mi
in that
caso,
case,
el
in my
icono de una
case,
montaña,
the
que me
icon of
pareció
a
que también era
mountain, which I
interesante
felt was
porque
interesting
la Bienal ocurre del otro lado
because
de
the
la
Biennale
cordillera, ¿no?
happens on the
Es
other
como
side of the Andes.
En esa contemplación de
In
la
that
montaña existen respuestas
contemplation of the
mudas, ¿no? Y
mountain,
que
there
no
are
son respuestas que
quiet
necesariamente
responses, mute
surgen de un
responses,
diálogo
which don't
entre
necessarily come
hombres
from
con hombres,
a
porque
dialogue of
finalmente
men with men,
todo pareciese
because
ser y
ultimately
yo
it
creo
seems
eso genera un nuevo problema
that
político,
generates
¿no?
a
Que
new
todo lo
political
político
problem because
necesariamente,
everything
al
that is
parecer,
political
ocurre entre humanos,
seems to happen
¿no?
between
Y a partir del
humans
lenguaje
and
que
from
nosotros utilizamos,
the
pero
language that we
no hay
use.
como una,
But there is no,
en el caso, y con esto cierro un poco
I'm going to close here.
esto, pero no, ahora yo creo que también
I
lo
think
político, por
This
ejemplo,
political
va de la mano de
goes hand in hand
reconocer estos otros
with
lenguajes, esas otras
recognizing
formas
these
de
other
vida,
languages,
estos
other
otros tiempos,
ways of
estas
life,
otras
other
religiones
times,
que han sido
other
escondidas,
religions,
todo ese universo
that whole universe
que nos habla de un planeta que habitamos
that
que tiene
speak to
otras
us of a
reglas y que
planet
no
that has
necesariamente
different rules and that
nosotros
is
hemos
not
sido capaces
necessarily,
como de
that we haven't
explorar,
necessarily been able
¿no?
to explore.
Sí, es interesante por ahí ligando
That's
lo
interesting
que comentaba hace un rato Gustavo,
because of what Gustavo was saying before. There is always, you always choose what to look at and something remains invisible. I think Martin wanted to speak.
Estás muteado, Martín.
Estoy muteado, ahí
You're
estoy.
muted. Okay.
Quería decir una
I
cosa,
wanted to
quizás
say something.
vuelvo un poco para atrás en realidad,
I may be
porque
going
me quedé
back
pensando un poco en
because I was thinking a
lo que
bit
pasaba cuando estaba
about
leyendo el texto Karina,
when
y
Karina was reading that
pensaba un
text,
poco en lo
and I was
difícil que fue
thinking
para
about
mí, un
how
poco
difficult it
cuando
was
me
for
senté a
me
pensar
when I sat down to
alrededor
think
de las consignas,
with regards to the
como lo difícil para mí
what
que
was
era definir
meant
lo
by this
íntimo
session, how hard it was for me
o
to define
definirlo
what
de
was
una manera
intimate
Y
or to define it in a
pensaba un
certain way.
poco, no sé, como que
And I
algo
was
de la charla de hoy
thinking
me obligó a
something about the
a
talk
repensar un
today
poco cómo fue todo el
made me
transcurso
rethink
de la pandemia, cómo fue
about
también
the
mi
pandemic
recorrido durante la pandemia, acordarme de
and
ciertas
how
cosas
everything went through the
este,
pandemic, and
del
to remember
principio
certain
quizás,
things.
y
And
pensaba cómo al principio
I
de la
was
pandemia
thinking
era muy
that at the
claro
beginning of the pandemic, it
que
was
había
very
como una especie
clear
de relato
that
muy
there was
unificado
a
sobre
kind of
qué es lo que
unified
significaba la intimidad.
story with regards
Yo me
to what
acuerdo de,
intimacy meant.
digamos,
I
prender la tele,
remember
leer el diario en las redes sociales,
I turned
ver
on the
siempre el
TV,
mismo
I
hashtag, por
read
ejemplo, o
the
incluso ver
newspaper
un
looking at
recital
the
en el que
same
estaban todos los
hashtag,
músicos
perhaps
tocando desde su
a concert
casa.
where
Me acuerdo, no
everybody's
sé, de ver a
playing
los
from
Rolling
their
Stones y cada
house.
uno estaba en su casa. O sea, había
Everybody
como
was playing, the Rolling Stones were playing,
una
and each
sensación
one
de
of them were
que
in
la
their own
intimidad era un
house.
concepto
A
muy
reason
unificado porque yo también
I
estaba en
felt
el
that
living de mi casa viendo
intimacy was a
eso.
very unifying concept because I was
Y
also in
nada,
my
y pienso
living
que en
room,
algún
like the
momento
Rolling
eso como que se
Stones.
empezó a medio
And
a
I think that
quebrar
at one point that
y que
began
pienso que
to
fue
break down, and
un
I
poco
think
más o menos en ese momento cuando apareció también la invitación de la
when the
BIM.
invite turned up for
Y
this
bueno, y me
beam,
parece interesante como la cantidad de cosas tan distintas que puede
and
ser y que puede
all of the
significar
things that
la intimidad, ¿no?
intimacy may mean to
Y
each
yo lo
one of
pienso
us.
mucho desde el trabajar con archivo,
I was thinking about it with regards to
porque claro, hay como, de repente lo que para
the
mí,
archive
lo que a mí me
material.
acerca una sensación de intimidad no tiene nada que ver con un
What
registro de algo
I like
cercano.
with regards to intimacy has
Tiene que
nothing
ver
to
con algo
do to
que
what other people
no puedo
think. It's
explicar,
not
pero digamos,
something that I have
quizás
just filmed. It is something that I
me
cannot
encontraba, no sé,
explain.
pienso un poco en imágenes con las que me fui encontrando y pienso quizás puntualmente en las
And
imágenes
I
que fui
think
encontrando
in
cuando
the
estaba
images that
revisando
I found
el
when I was
celular
going through
de
my
mi papá
dad's cell phone.
y en el universo visual con el que me encontré de repente, que era un universo de
And the
él.
universe I found, which was his
Y
universe.
pienso cómo
And
me
I
emocionaba
think
y cómo me sentía muy
how
conectado a
that
todas las
made me
imágenes que iba
feel and how
encontrando,
that made me
que
feel
no eran
connected to
solamente
all
como
the
imágenes
images that I
familiares en
found.
donde yo podía
They were not just
verlo a él
family
o
images
vernos
where
a
I could see
nosotros como
him or
familia,
see
sino
us as a family,
como de
but
repente todas las cosas que componían ese
all of the
universo visual en
things
donde había
that
videos que
were
él quizás
his
había
visual
descargado de internet, que
universe.
se había,
Maybe videos he had
no sé, que
downloaded from
alguien le
the
había mandado por
internet,
WhatsApp,
videos
recetas de
that somebody had
cocina,
sent him,
pedazos de peleas de box,
bits of recipes,
muchos videos
boxing
de músicos
matches, many
tocando, no sé, como
videos
que
of musicians.
pensaba que también la intimidad es todo eso para mí, de alguna manera.
That's what I thought, that all of that was part of the same thing. I think of the session that happened yesterday, the body in the street, something that Diego was speaking about. We have been having these elements of the body, the street, we've been talking about that, the intimacy and the political, and how we can articulate this and meet ourselves in these intersections that are formed between what's public and what's private or intimate. Perhaps for somebody it is political, or it's interesting, Gianfranco says, to film that mountain. I think it's the urgency to film those bodies in the streets and the urgency to stop time and to look at things, and that image that we want to share bits of your intimacy from private archives of others, or your desire to generate an affectionate link with somebody, and the power of media, everything that you were speaking about, the power of images, the media. I think the chance to think about the image, that in itself is political. The possibility of thinking of a time and the going through time in a particular segment, this struggle, as you say, how can we oppose ourselves to the official or the politically correct image? I think it is the possibility of not seeing, the possibility behind the gaze, So it's not just one or the other. That's why I'm saying body, street, intimate, political. I don't think these issues are separate. I think the body in the street, the political body, the political intimacy, the political street is all part of the same. Paz, I think, raised her hand.
Sí, pensando un poco algo en
Yes,
relación a lo que estás diciendo,
thinking a bit with regards to what you were saying, because I think
que a veces nosotros,
that sometimes,
por estar detrás de
because
cámara,
we are
no estamos delante.
behind the camera, we think that we're not in front of the camera. And
Lo íntimo es lo político, y pienso que
when it
también
comes to the
para
intimate
nosotros
being
como
political,
personas
for us,
dejarnos
the
ver,
political
no
may be
estamos
to
delante,
allow ourselves
sino
to be
estamos
seen.
claramente detrás.
We are clearly behind the camera with a clear perspective, with
Es que me caso,
a
lo ha dicho
texture.
todo, de que soy lo que filmo.
I am what I film.
Lo que filmo
Mekasa
es
said
lo
it
que
all.
filmo.
I live as I film.
Es así.
That's the way it is.
Esa claridad, ¿no? De dejar una mirada
That clarity of
clara,
leaving your
una parte,
perspective,
¿no?
your own
Yo creo que es
perspective.
lo más cercano a
That
lo
for
íntimo
me
y político. Creo que hoy
is the closest to what's intimate is political.
y dejarse ver
To have
puede hacer un gesto político
a
muy fuerte.
perspective and to allow yourself to be seen may be a very political gesture. I am what I look at, right? Something like that.
Bueno,
Yes,
eso era un poco lo que
that
yo
was
trataba de,
what I was
de
trying
decir,
to
¿no? O sea,
say.
cómo uno
How,
como autor
as an author,
va articulando un lenguaje
you
y
articulate a
va
language
siguiendo un camino
and you follow a
que,
path
que no necesariamente
that is not
por lo que está pasando
necessarily due to
tiene
what's happening.
como, no sé, yo por ejemplo estoy aquí
For example,
a
I
2
am
cuadras
2 blocks away from
de la plaza, de la nueva plaza, antes se
the
llamaba Plaza
square,
Italia, ahora se
Plaza
llama,
Dignidad, where the protests take
¿cómo le
place
dicen
in
ahora?
Chile.
Plaza de la Dignidad. No, pero no, y no sé, no me nace,
I don't
estar
know. I
ahí
don't want to be there
porque, no sé, entonces mi
because I don't
manera
know.
es como
So my
escapar,
way is to
¿no? Y
escape from there
transformar y
and
tratar de
to
hacer videos que
try to do
tengan como
videos that
un lugar
have
más
a
no
more
sé, en lo poético,
poetic,
en salir de eso, quizás,
to go
¿no?
out,
Dejar de mirar eso
to stop looking at that
y darle espacio
and to give
a otro
room
tipo de
to
lugares,
other
darle espacio al
types of
silencio, por
places and
ejemplo,
to
¿no?
give
Que es
space to
algo
silence,
muy
to give
difícil,
room
casi
for
inédito,
silence, which
¿no?
is something
El ejercicio de estar
very
en
difficult.
silencio
The exercise of being in
para mí
silence,
es muy
for me,
importante y
is
dar
very
la
important, and
posibilidad
to have the
de
possibility
que ese silencio se
for
genere
that silence to be generated
también, ¿no?
also.
Entonces, ahí digo, o sea,
That's what I say.
no sé, digo y me esfuerzo, digo, no,
I make an effort.
no me interesa mucho como
I'm not too
seguir generando
interested
imágenes que están
to generate
constantemente
images that are
generándose. O sea, la Plaza de la Dignidad
completely being
tiene,
generated all the time.
no sé,
The
200
square
millones
has like
de imágenes
200
en
million
movimiento
moving
por
images that
semana,
were
porque
generated
hay
a week because there are
millones de personas con sus
millions of
celulares
people with their
retratando
cell phones
eso
constantly
desde muchos
portraying
puntos de vista
that from many
distintos,
different
¿no?
perspectives.
Pero es lo que
And
se está
that
oficialmente
is what officially
observando y
is
como
being observed
discutiendo
and
y todo
discussed,
se concentra un poco en ese
and
lugar.
everything is
Entonces,
being concentrated
no
there.
sé, escapar de ese lugar me parece que
To escape from
no está
that,
mal.
I think is the right thing to do. What Gianfranco says reminds me to the discussion of whether yes to work or not to work. That binary argument, whether work is a system for exploitation or that should be abolished. I think these are things that are not resolved. That is the problem. You cannot really resolve it, whether the the intimate, the public, the street, whether the institutions, the space within, the systems of art, and whether the art can happen or not. I think we are trapped in a complex situation there. Everything overflows into each other much more than we think. To this equation or to this work, when we think about intimate political street body, we could add the word desire. When Gianfranco talks to me, I always think of the word desire. I also think about the word identity. And I think there are a lot of political paths that are manifested in diverse ways and that are multiple. And I think it is interesting or necessary to think about them outside the binary form, as Karina was just saying. Not to think of identity or bodies in the street as a response or a solution or something that may be fixed, something that is in movement and that changes, but these are political paths to fight for the equal rights, for example. And I think then it is necessary to pick up those paths to produce. And I think it's very interesting how artistic practices can contaminate other places, such as Plaza Dignidad, which is profoundly contaminated by what is coming from the arts, and that give us back a different way of looking at that square and the bodies that are protesting there from the outside, perhaps, of that standardized frame, as Gianfranco was saying before, of miseducating us.
Sí. Claro, bueno, la
Well,
Plaza de la Dignidad es un
the
gran
square
escenario, ¿no?
is like a big stage.
Está todo es como una gran performance
It is like a
masiva,
big
constante,
performance, like a
y en
massive,
donde las
constant
fuerzas
performance,
públicas y
where
las
the public
personas
forces and
cohabitan,
people
se pelean, es un
cohabitate,
campo de
they
batalla a ciertos
struggle.
momentos.
It's a
Y
battlefield.
realmente, pero para que nosotros como chilenos,
But for us as
claro, ahí
Chileans,
hay todo un tema
there is
del
something
espacio
there
público,
that has to do with the
hay un
public
tema
space.
de la libertad, o
There
sea,
is
nosotros en
the issue
Chile
of
por
freedom
mucho
in
tiempo
Chile for
fuimos
a
una
long
sociedad
time.
en donde
We were
habitar el espacio
a
público nos
society
era
where to
ajeno.
inhabit the public space was
Era
something
muy
alien to
esta
us.
cosa de salir a las plazas, de compartir
Going
en
out
las
into the
plazas,
squares and sharing time in
es algo
squares
relativamente
is something
nuevo,
that is
¿no?
relatively new.
Entonces, esa como
So
liberación
that liberation
es
that
súper,
happened
yo creo que es como
is
es muy política, pero a la vez también es como hay como una cosa
political,
psicomágica, ¿no? Como
but it is also a bit of
de
psychomagic,
expresar
of
en
expressing
libertad, ¿no?
ourselves in
En
freedom.
ese sentido, el
And in
espacio
that sense,
público
the
genera
public space
ese cruce
generates
social
that
y
social
que estos múltiples
intersection,
mundos
and multiple
puedan ser
worlds
reconocidos,
can be
¿no?
recognized in it.
Y eso me parece como
And that,
muy interesante
I believe, is very interesting
sociológicamente
in a sociological
de
perspective,
ese cohabitar de gente
of that
que ocurre
cohabiting
y
of people
esas
and
ganas
that
o deseos de toda la
urge or
gente como
desire
de una especie como
of everybody
culto, no sé,
to have this
juntarse y ser
kind of
libre y expresar y utilizar las
leadership and
artes
to express
para manifestar
the
un
arts,
poco
to manifest
la desigualdad y bueno, todas
inequality and all
la
the
serie de peticiones que existen
series
desde
of
la
things
ciudadanía hacia un gobierno
from
o
the
un
citizenship
Estado
towards a state or a government
que ya no es representativo.
that no longer represents them.
No, nada.
Sorry,
quería
Gaby.
ver
I just wanted to see if anybody
si está presente en esta
wanted
mesa,
to talk.
quiere compartir alguna idea, pregunta. Quiero abrir.
A mí me gustaría preguntarles qué
I
pasa
would
con
like
el
to
COVID,
ask,
¿no? Porque hemos
what happens with
hablado
COVID?
poco y nada
Because
de
we
la
haven't really
pandemia
spoken about the
y creo
pandemic.
que
And I
también es
think
interesante como
it's very
escuchar un
interesting
poco
to
qué es
listen
lo que piensan
to
o
what
en qué
people
situaciones
think
están,
or
porque
what
son
is the
varios los países
situation,
y las
because there are many
políticas
countries
y
here
los
and the different
contextos son
policies and
muy
the different
distintos, ¿no?
contexts.
¿Cómo están en términos?
How are you doing?
Siguen encerrados en sus
Are you
casas? ¿Hay
still locked up in
posibilidad de
your houses?
movimiento?
Can you move around?
En Buenos Aires
In Buenos Aires,
estuvo absolutamente paralizado por
Buenos
mucho
Aires was
tiempo,
completely
¿no?
paralyzed for a long time.
No sé, no sé, tú estás
Paz, you are in
en Paraguay ahora.
Paraguay now?
Yo estoy en Paraguay ahora.
I'm in Paraguay.
Paraguay tuvo como
Paraguay had
muy buen panorama al principio.
a very good perspective to begin with. I was in Rio,
Muy buen panorama al
but it
principio.
was very good at the beginning because
Cuarentena de una manera muy estricta.
the quarantine was adhered to very strictly. But at some point, they had to open certain things
como de manera progresiva y ahora
progressively, and now everybody is living
viviendo con el COVID, haciendo una vida normal.
with COVID. Everybody's trying to carry on a normal life with a mask. I go out the least possible and I choose who to relate to, but Paraguay is living normally with masks. I don't know, yesterday I was reading something very disheartening in the newspaper. We are with COVID, but we're worried about dengue fever. So I was very disheartened because last year we already had the epidemic of dengue fever, and in January the hospitals seemed like war hospitals. So if you're worried about dengue now, I don't know. We are worse than we think. We're doing worse than we think.
Acá también vuelven a
Here, we're also going to get the worry about dengue fever as well. We're trying to get rid of all water, etc., to avoid it. So yeah, that's what's happening. Here we open things with regards to the politics because in Paraguay there is a guerrilla group which kidnapped somebody, pretty big kidnapping. They began to set fire to places, and they exchanged something, and things opened up. I think at one point we will collapse because that's what's happening in every other country. I think at some point we will. I'm not really sure how we'll be able to go back and say, okay, now we're going to have curfew or quarantine. I don't think that's possible. I don't know how things will continue.
Perdón, Richard Pons,
Excuse me, Richard Pons would like to ask something.
Sí, ¿qué tal? ¿Cómo les va?
Yes, hello, how are you? I just wanted to make a comment. Thank you for the comments and for the work that everybody put forth at the Biennale, at the BEAM, and thank you for sharing this space so we can express ourselves. I just wanted to say with regards to what is being discussed is that there is a proliferation of images, that's true, that are not always reflective, a proliferation of images that are produced from millions and millions of devices, but as producers of image and of senses, we have to narrate our time. Generations pass by, and when you look at the material of different generations, each person narrated the time they were living. And that is what we are leaving for those who come after. Our subjectivity, our vision, our complaints, whether we complain about something or we express something, and it doesn't matter if the perspective is personal, if you are relating something that is deeply personal or small experience or a social complaint, or to go out with a camera to record images, it is our responsibility, because that's what we produce, images, and we give meaning from the arts, from film, and from the audiovisual. So that's what I wanted to say, that my thoughts is that we need to carry that responsibility. Social changes were mentioned, and social changes that we are living at the moment, we have no idea of their depth. And we can actually suspect what we can understand, but these are very deep changes. They're not good. They're not bad necessarily. They are the changes that happened in other times in mankind. But of course, we managed to understand it better than at other times in history. And we have there is a very big chance of manipulation. So our generation is forced to tell of its time and to denounce things that we are seeing from our perspective. That is what I wanted to say. Thank you. Thank you, Richard. Does somebody else from the audience want to say something? We have a question from YouTube.
Mauro
Grimaldi asks, in a moment where the trend seems to go towards exposing what's intimate, aren't we allowing suggestion on the part of somebody who wants to expose these images? What are the artistic ways that we can set these images in motion? Thank you, Agus. Somebody from the table? The question should be repeated. Please repeat. Please repeat the question. At a time where the trend seems to go towards exposing what is intimate, are we not allowing suggestion on whoever wants to expose those images with a commercial or political intention? What are the forms that can put this on the table? So the images that cohabit within the BIM can be used? No, I think it's a general question. Andres wants to answer. Sorry, I don't have a lot of voice left over. I just like to have an opinion. There are no artistic ways. That is my first reaction. Art depends on context. So the images that are produced cannot, there is no such thing as an artistic form of the images, and the images that we produce can always be appropriated. There are no artistic forms, I insist. I love the silence and to generate a void. Mauro says, in general,
no sé bien a qué se
in the YouTube
refiere.
chat. So he's not talking about the beam images, he's talking in general.
Sí, bueno, yo siempre sé
I
que estos meses se hacía el chiste de que grabar
I used to
es
joke about the fact that the Zoom is political
guardamos
because at least
imágenes en
we
nuestros
keep our
servidores,
images in our hard disks and we don't only leave them in our servers of the multinationals. That's the only place where they exist. But that has nothing to do with art.
No, pero pues también, por ejemplo, lo que
But
ocurre
for
hoy en
example,
día
what
mucho
happens
son
nowadays
las muy famosas
is the very
fake
famous
news,
fake
¿no?
news,
Y y eso también volvemos un poco a
and that
a
also
este lugar
goes
de qué es
back
lo
to
real
what is real
cuál es la ficción, ¿no?
and
Donde
what
las
is fictional.
imágenes te muestran
Images
el mundo y
show
ese
you the world,
mundo
and that world
construido por imágenes no necesariamente tiene
built by images is
relación
not necessarily
con
true
con la realidad. Entonces,
or real.
y en donde los medios también claramente
And media
existen, no son medios neutros,
are not
sino son
neutral.
medios que almacenan la
Media
información, utilizan la
stores
información,
and uses
saben lo que
information. They
consume
know
y se
what
acercan a ti
is consumed and they
en
come to you.
pro de, por eso yo digo un poco el manifiesto, en pro
That's
de
what I
deuda.
mean.
¿No?
They come to you
Oye,
with
esa
an
es la
intent.
sociedad y el mundo en que vivimos. Todos los
That is the
mensajes
society and the world we live in.
se traducen desde
All
el
the
computador
messages that are
llegan
translated from
a
the
una
computer
memoria
get
enorme que
to a big
luego es muy
computer,
chistoso
which
porque luego te pone
then
las cosas
it's funny because
enfrente,
it
¿no? Y uno dice,
puts
chuta, hoy
things that
día
you're
estaba
interested in.
pensando
I was
en que
thinking today,
quería
for example, you
hacer un
think
regalo
that I
o
wanted
quería
to
llamar a
buy a
alguien
gift or I wanted to
y
call
la imagen de
somebody,
ese alguien aparece
and
frente a
that
ti.
the
Y uno dice,
image of
wow,
that
qué
person
casualidad.
comes
No,
up
no es una
and you
casualidad.
think it's a coincidence, and
Ese
it's
es
not
un
a
algoritmo que
coincidence.
está
That is an
en todas las
algorithm
máquinas,
that is
esta
in
de
all
aquí, en la
machines.
que
It's
tenemos
here,
enfrente,
it's in the computer, it's
y ese es el
everywhere.
mundo en que vivimos, ¿no?
And that is
Entonces,
the world we live in.
también me
So
parece que es interesante cuestionarlo porque
I think it's
quizá
interesting
vamos a
to
tener que en el
question it
futuro que empezar a hablar
because in future
o a comunicarnos ya no desde las imágenes en
we
movimiento,
can
sino desde
communicate not
otro tipo de
just from
lenguaje para
moving
poder
images, but from a different type of
codificarlo de
language so we
nuevo
can
y para
codify it,
porque
decode it again.
me explico porque en
Do you
ese
understand?
código
So that within that
quizás
code,
el lenguaje no se hace
language
legible para las máquinas,
is not legible to
¿no?
machines.
Que hoy son probablemente mucho más inteligentes que nosotros.
Perhaps
Altamente.
because they are much more intelligent than us. Andrés asked to speak. A very small intervention. If in this context we need to say that all image is a construction and there is no such thing as reality, we are dead.
Llegué muy negativo.
Am I too negative, pessimistic? Gustavo, you wanted to say something? No, I'm thinking about two things. The political discussion, which is a political construction over language. The problem is not the square or the mountain or what is the language we use to speak about it. I think the political confrontation is also the confrontation of the resources and the language of power. The language of power make me identify two things that are very precise. One is what we might call clarity in all the connections to do with images, and that is the personal, the production of an image with an emotional reinforcement that controls emotion. Today, we can see that we don't see any news without incidental music, which is absolutely nuts. So I think that to discuss the political nature and the construction of images implies discussing strategies of the power in constructing those images. And the confrontation is always in the language.
Pues,
Perhaps in this sense, we may think from the title of Gustavo's title to the materials that Martín looks, the raw material, those images that were made up without thinking about them as work, but as things that we collect in our devices, or what we can look at from the proximity of the small camera to what is in front of it. And that's where we get some deviations on those fossilized images, as Gustavo was saying before. I think it's very important to see how these intimate images that appear in your works are permeated by these materials that are almost from an amateur film arena, which is something we picked up on when we spoke about Diego's work, an image which are made from affection, from finding a way to look at ourselves and to see what our position is in the world and our places in the world, and to portray that habitat that sets us in relation to other spaces and other times.
Sí, Ari, yo iba a votar eso de que me parece importante
Yeah, I
el
was going to
tema de la
say something
temporalidad.
with regards to
A mí me
temporality.
quedó muy grabado algo que dice Paz en uno de los videos. esto de
Something
que
that Paz says in one of
necesita
the
tiempo
videos,
para transitar
that you
el
need
tiempo.
time to go through time.
Realmente esa
I think
frase
that phrase
del trabajo
that
de
she
Paz me quedó
uses
muy
is
impregnada
very
y creo que aparece también
important to me, and
en
it
los
also
trabajos que
is seen
se hilaron en esta mesa, ¿no?
in
Otra
what
relación
we've
también
been
no solamente
discussing,
con
a
las estrategias de
relationship not only
construcción de la
with
imagen,
the
sino con los
strategies to
modos
construct
de
image, but also with the
transitar el
ways
tiempo,
that we go through
justamente cuando
time.
el tiempo está tan extrañado. Pero
When time
creo
is
que los
so
trabajos
weird,
reflejan un
I
poco
think
esos
the works
corrimientos
reflect
también en el
those
tratamiento o
changes
el
in the
habitar el tiempo,
treatment
¿no?
or
Por lo
the
menos
normality of
en mis
time.
trabajos son,
At least in
mis
my
tres trabajos
works,
son como un tiempo real, un
they
tiempo,
are like in
no
real
hay
time.
como más que un corte
There
en el
is
video,
no
no hay
more
como
than a cut
ninguna,
in a video. There
no hay
is
ningún
no
montaje en mi caso, como que es
montage
que el tiempo,
in my case.
el
It
tiempo
is
normal,
just
digamos, de
normal, real
transcurre esa
time
situación, ¿no?
that goes through that situation.
Lo mismo que las campanas del otro trabajo
Same
también,
as
son campanas
the
que suenan todos los
bells
días, desde
are
que llegué a mi
bells that
casa a las 7:30
sound
en
every
la iglesia
day.
que está cerca de mi casa, y no sé por
Whenever
qué
there is a
suenan todos los
church
días
near
a las 7:30, pero suenan.
my house, and there are
Y es algo de
bells
esas
that
cosas, ¿no? Encontrar
peal
esos
every
nuevos
day at 7:30
registros,
a.m.
esos nuevos
and those are the
gestos
new gestures that you notice
del tiempo, no solamente de
to
los
do with time,
espacios o
not
de las
only to do with
proximidades, sino
space
son
or
otros
proximity,
registros
but other
del tiempo.
ways of
Me
registering
pareció
time.
ahora escuchando
I thought
la conversación.
about this when I was listening to this conversation.
Eso yo creo que es una de las grandes
I think
preguntas
that is one of the main questions
quizás jamás se van a poder responder.
that
Es cómo está
perhaps will never be
configurado el
able to
tiempo en el
be
espacio, ¿no?
answered,
Y la
how time
posibilidad
is
de esta cámara
configured,
de
and
interpretar
the
el tiempo a
possibility that
diferencia
this camera
de
has
cualquier
to
otro dispositivo,
portray this
¿no?
better
Entonces,
than any other device.
ahí esa yo creo que es la gran
That, to me,
fascinación de la imagen en movimiento.
the big fascination of the image in
esa
movement,
proximidad con los fenómenos que
the
ocurren
proximity
físicos en el tiempo, ¿no?
of
Y
the
que
physical and
hay
time.
una cosa que hace de la cámara no solamente
What the camera does,
un un artefacto para desarrollar un lenguaje, sino un
not just
artefacto
an
para
artifact to
descubrir
develop a language, but an artifact to
interpretar,
discover, to interpret
algo que es desconocido, ¿no? Y
something
en
that
donde
is
los científicos
unknown,
lo interpretan y bueno, todos estos
and
antecedentes
scientists
son
interpret
interpretables y se
it,
pueden poner en un
and all of
gráfico y
this is
te
interpretable,
pueden
is up for
enseñar un montón de
interpretation,
cosas de
and
cómo
it can teach
el espacio físico
many
está
ways in
configurado,
which
¿no?
the physical
Entendamos
space
que
is
la
configured.
cámara
We should understand that the
es
camera
más que nada un artefacto
is an artifact
que ha tenido también ese rol en
that
términos
has
históricos,
that
¿no?
role in historic times
Generar datos
to
que
generate
son
data,
analizables.
which is analyzable
Entonces, en el tiempo, siempre
in
esa
time.
es la condición, en el tiempo.
That is the condition. What Gianfranco is saying, the idea of an aesthetic artifact defends, as a counterpoint to what Andres was saying, the idea of possible artistic forms, because to me it is difficult to think that everything can be explained just from the sociological contextual situation. I think aesthetic artifacts also have a meaning and create reality effects, and that they are there to create those realities, and artistic forms can be analyzed with context. But the idea of a context are to do more with sociology. It is interesting, I believe, to think about each other, but not to invalidate what can be the expressive or communicational act of an artistic expression.
Y no porque a mí me interese mucho la obra
Not
como
because
categoría.
I'm interested in the work as a category.
Bueno,
Okay,
estuvo buenísima la charla. Ya
our
estamos
talk was fantastic. We are on time. If anybody wants to say something, now is the time, or if there's any urgent question or any thought from the audience.
Bueno, les agradecemos mucho
Okay, we thank everybody for being here, for participating in this Biennale, for being in this session, for sharing your thoughts and your ideas. We expect you all to be here. Tomorrow, activities will continue. I need to check. It is 4 p.m. tomorrow. There is a talk with Ursula Beeman, and at 6:30, there is the sessions on conservation, 4 cases of conservation. So I think that is also a very interesting issue to discuss and to think about. Many things to look at in the videos that have been uploaded throughout the week up until Saturday. We will have sessions with some of the artists that participated in A Space to Gaze. So welcome. Thank you for participating. Thank you to the interpreter and to the team behind the transmission.
Muchas gracias por la invitación.
Thank you for the invite.
Los videos de las conversaciones
The videos
van a
of these
quedar en alguna
conversations
parte.
will be recorded and set somewhere. All the videos Oh, you mean these conversations? Yeah, everything is recorded on YouTube simultaneously.
Perfecto.
Perfect.
En el YouTube de la BIM, ¿cierto?
In the Beam YouTube channel.
Bueno, ahí recibimos,
We have received
comentarios en el chat. Muchas gracias
thanks
por
on the chat. Thank you everybody for participating.
un beso.
Big kiss to everybody.
Y mucho ánimo para los tiempos que vienen.
And
Fuerza,
strength
ánimo
for
y
the
salud.
times, health and
No
love.
perder el positivismo.
We should not lose our positive outlook.
Bueno.